let's reconstruct it as the new lads come in, as they do, and we're really excited for this time to back together. We are Sansia panel style, but very much so they expect it to be interactive, and so feel free to pipe in, and I'll have some specific points where I'll invite you to share your thoughts, and then we can co-create around this theme together. My name is Alexis Day. I work with SPARC. It's an acronym, and handily I put it up on the screen for you, supporting pastoralism and agriculture in referring to protracted crises. I'm one of the researchers on the team, and we have an excellent set of panelists here today to co-create this thing together. And as you can see, the anchor is quite exciting for us. Last year and the year before, AgriFin has been much more thoughtful about thinking about the livestock sector, and specifically pastoralists as agro-pastoralists, as agro-producers, which is to say not just higher wage for farmers, but thinking about what it means to farm and care for livestock in the Drylands context. So for this year, we're excited to think specifically about the livestock sector as a whole, and I'll say more about that. Everyone will describe, as I say, their side of the camel, and we'll get to hear the tail and the head, and how everyone approaches this particular question. So we're thinking from the full gamut, from production, and maybe a little bit more about what policy environment makes that possible, to the fullest capacity. We'll think about livestock traders and the wider marketing ecosystem at different scales, local, national, regional. Thinking about financial services, public investment, private capital, and then, as I said again, the environment. So quite a huge task that we've set for ourselves here, but we are quite excited and will agree that the value generated by the livestock sector by far outpaces the current investment. And so we're interested to think together about why is that the case. Mario, we have Tito, and we have Kristen, and we'll get to learn way more about them as we go along. So I'll start with Roshan and invite you to speak.
Thanks a lot, Alexis, and good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for being here. Well, my title says institutions and innovations, and sometimes people always wonder how do these two sort of go together. So, in the sense which part of the camel that I'm talking about is actually right in the middle, because it kind of joins the head as well as the tail. That has been sort of my work in the last now going to almost like decade plus 5 in the Drylands, and I'm sort of known as the insurance lady also sometimes, so I hate that name. But mainly what my work has been, and what I have been really interested about is how do you develop this whole financial sector in the Drylands, and especially in the pastoral areas and in the nomadic areas. Of course, we started with work around index-based livestock insurance, which is like our flagship work, and then now we have sort of spun out into different things that we are doing, and taking like a very comprehensive approach, and also the recognition of the fact that one financial tool is not enough to sort of deal with all the complexities that is there when it comes to the Drylands and the pastoral areas. So essentially, what my work entails is trying to understand the innovations that can actually happen in processes. How can basically existing local institutions be strengthened further? How can the capacities be increased? And more than anything else, how can markets be developed, but not in a linear, but like understanding all the challenges that come with it. So that has been kind of my work for the last several years now. And what I will describe the Drylands is that in a place where there is literally never a dull moment, but it's an area of challenges for sure, but definitely a very lot more opportunities. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Wario Sake. I'm a veterinarian, and I'll say my experience in the desert or in Dryland is older than my age, because I was born and brought up in that landscape. Actually, I was born in the heart of Chambi Desert in Morocco, in Masaryk County. So, but my work has also taken me through wider into the Drylands, in the Eastern Georgia, and all those places, in Isiolo. So, my first experience of working in this landscape is working with Steadily Africa Limited, a franchise model business of input supplies for animal health and production. And I've since also had experience with the public sector in the county government of Masterclass as chief of staff for livestock for the last 5 years of the last administration. And currently I'm working with Northern Rangelands Trust as Director for Livestock at Machinery Works. So I think we will go to say more, but generally, we shall say it's a lot of opportunities. It's only not dry. It's full of life. That's got livestock, a number of them, good plants. So I think we're going to talk more about it. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Tito TV. I work with Gatsby Africa in the livestock program. At Gatsby, we look at ways of making the beef value chain more resilient and overall increase beef output in the country in a way that benefits everyone and that will make the sector more competitive, resilient, and inclusive. Over the last couple of years, Kenya has on average slaughtered about 2 million heads of cattle every year. And we would think that that's a really huge number of cattle to consume. But the issue is that on average, carcass would range between 100 to 125 kgs. And then that actually then means that we become deficient in the beef that we are producing vis-a-vis the demand that there is in the market. And so the question for us at Gatsby is, how do we increase the productivity of the herd that we have as a country? How do we increase the productivity of the resource, of the cattle resource that we have, being the third largest cattle resource in Africa, in a way that benefits the pastoralists and improves the nutritional indicators amongst the population and businesses and the economy as a whole.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kristen Gervitz, and I run a consulting company called AgThrive, based here in Nairobi. And the reason I am here today is because of a partnership we have with ILRI and GLAD, looking at how to increase livestock and poultry investing across the continent. And one of the things that we do as part of that is we look at what investments have already happened. And you have probably all seen the brief. We did that in Kenya. And we'll get into, I think, some of the data and some of the learnings that we took out of that. We've also expanded it to 5 additional countries across the continent. And we're looking at livestock, including beef, and small ruminant investing, but also poultry investing. And the reason, I think we all are familiar with, but let me just give you a little bit of data. So since 2015, there were around more than 100 deals in agriculture made in Kenya from the impact investing sector for the amount of $500 million. Less than 10% of these deals were in livestock. And that's livestock and poultry. And if you look, and even less than that was in anything related to the Drylands. So let me just add another, just very small data point coming out of the ASF. So one thing we've heard from investors is that one of their key ways of getting pipeline is going to meetings like ASF, the African Food Systems Forum, which have just happened in Rwanda. They do the agribusiness deal room, right? So there were 37 businesses that pitched there. I think 10 of them were livestock or poultry or somehow tangentially beef or animal protein related. None of them were working in the Drylands in any way. So there, just to sort of set the stage up, there is, and we all know this, but just to give you some data on, there's very limited investments happening there. We looked at 75 deals, 41 investors who had made 75 deals in 11 subsectors in 20 countries across the continent, and around 12% of those deals were in beef or meat processing. So 12% in beef or meat processing. Some of those touch the Drylands. But if you look at the total amount of money, that's $320 million, less than $10 million. So quite a number of deals, but very small percentage of the actual funds that were flowed. Why? That's what I hope to get into today. That's what we looked at, and we looked at sort of in depth and really talked to the investors, talked to the businesses, to dig into that.
Excellent, thank you. Better? Soon. Okay, wonderful. So that's as a teaser of the folks we have here with you today. The way I hope to structure this, I'm going to ask them a general question, but I'm going to open up actually early on to questions. I know people like to leave it up to the end, but we wanted to co-create and hear some of your hypotheses on why that case is this particular puzzle that Kristen has posed for us. So I'll pose a question to them and then I'll open to the group. Feel free to pipe up, but it will be a last chance, so we'll come back again. Okay, so I'll come back here, and I'm tempted to actually return to you, Kristen, if that's okay. And so you've already said this disproportionate level of under financing in this particular sector. What I'm curious about is if you could start to help people understand within that level of investment, small though it may be, what are trends that you're noticing, and if I speak to your wider work, especially with AgThrive and what you're listening about agricultural investment in higher areas.
Okay, let's see. So I'll say a few things. I mean, I think some things are obvious, and if you've read the brief, you'll know this well. Poultry and dairy are the most invested in the livestock sector. More than, well, over 50% of investments fall into that, and that's for a number of reasons. One is they're more structured, they're more formalized, they can be contractual, and they have a commercial end buyer generally. So that's one part of it. Another part of it is that investors like the path well trodden. So a lot of investors go where others have already gone. So you end up with a scenario, if you're risk averse, you're not going to go be the first player in an area. So investors like to partner, investors like to invest in businesses that someone they know has invested in, they get their ideas from each other. So that's another reason why dairy and poultry get a lot of investment. And that's sort of the positives for dairy and poultry, right? Now, we are also hearing that investors are starting to look more and more for other opportunities because, for example, in Kenya, dairy is saturated. So commercial banks, but also impact investors are saying to us, well, okay, we are maybe interested in looking at piggery, at animal feed, and in some cases, beef also. And I think Tito will be able to talk to us a little bit more about that. But we can't ignore sort of the risk side of businesses operating in the drylands, and also sort of the investment readiness question. So just to give you a couple examples. When we were talking to an impact investor, they were looking at intensity and they were looking at an investment opportunity with a meat processor. And they actually ended up deciding to pull out at the last minute because the suppliers of that processor lost 80% of their herd, 80% of their animals in a drought. And there was no protection. The meat processor hadn't done anything to support the producers to mitigate that risk. There was just nothing in place. So the investor said, I'm out of here, no way. So that's on the risk part of it. We have to figure out how to deal with that. Another part of generating more interest in why dairy and poultry make margins as well is this investment readiness piece. So we held a pitch event where we had 10 businesses that we had worked with in Kenya. We had developed a pipeline of 10. We supported them to develop their pitches. 2 were dryland operating companies, which Gatsby knows very well. They're actually partnered with Gatsby. One of them was a very innovative business model, decent, basically a good business model, a good proposition, a decent pitch, walked into the office with a cardboard box full of the financials. So it's just, that then you're looking at like a really steep climb to get to investor readiness. And you're not going to have investors, as much as we want to say, take more risk, well, there's always going to be a bottom line that needs to be fulfilled, and that's something we're just going to have to address.
I think we'll come back to that and teach you more thoughts on that. I wanted to pause in open to questions as we pin the thought on risk, on investor readiness, and then also started thinking about what public investment might look like and then why you're asking about that. And I'll take a question if someone has already some thoughts and wants to share with the room. And it could be why exactly did you choose to come and where you're going to get.
Yeah, I'm loud. American. So I think oh yeah, well now everyone out there can hear too. I think my question is about data, right? So I trade livestock, mostly small ones, as a couple of you know. One of the challenges is that collecting data in markets can be very difficult, where even asking about prices could get you run out of the place. And certainly collecting that information, exposing yourself to whatever regulatory and KRA type things are there, it doesn't put you in a good place to get banks attracted to you in terms of credit. And so there's a big incentive for data collection problem. Is anybody working on that? Oh yeah, okay, beautiful. Do you want this back?
Yes. Well done.
Okay, thanks for the question. Actually, the expert is sitting at the back of the room. But now, since I'm at the panel, on that note, please go and visit the marketplace.
Yeah.
Let me tell you more. So, since I'm here, I'm going to take advantage of sounding like the expert. So basically, that's one of the things we tried to address, like way back in 2017, and links to a little bit of the flagship project of us called index-based livestock insurance, because when payouts started happening, there was no information in terms of, okay, where do you go, what do you get, especially related to the markets. So basically, we designed a platform based on crowdsourcing and citizen science, basically, and where we actually use members of the community who collect weekly high-frequency data in the markets related to livestock prices, body condition, even household nutrition level data, rangeland conditions, and also like prices of essential commodities. And right now you realize that that has actually been super helpful, because a lot of people are actually coming to us, and we have enough evidence to suggest that the data quality is actually quite good. So because we have like an extremely rigorous process of data quality and data check. Of course, initially we were doing it manually, as like members of the team were actually validating it, but we have now migrated to the use of machine learning and AI. So it's like our life has become much easier, because we are also scaling at the same time. So this is one of the problems that we're actually trying to solve hands-on. And it's just not about the collection of the data, but we're also actually providing the data back to the community based on what they are asking for. So like that, at this point, you can actually get multiple prices across markets and so on and so forth. And so now we are currently working with the likes of NDMA, Mercycor is one of them, and then of course even people like African Relief Services, and most recently, which was like a big achievement for us, the Kenya Met Department and Cargo actually asked us for that market information, because now they want to start putting that as part of like the monthly bulletins, or the part of dissemination, which they see as some form of like a forecasting and early warning in terms of like for conditions to come. So for more information, go to Kelvin Shikuku. He's raising his hand. Yeah.
We know each other.
Yeah.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Just wondering on your topic there in terms of financing livestock trade from your report from SPARC. Just wondering, the panelists will share their thoughts with regards to, so in terms of unlocking finance to the livestock sector, are you taking a trade approach? What's the role of financing production, which has thought about index-based? How do you unlock? Is there thinking starting with the trade, following the trade routes? Are we talking about production finance? What's the role of bundling services or bundling different service types of financing to unlock investment?
Rupia has thoughts, but I'm also wondering if you want to jump in with this one first.
Yeah, sure. Now I want before discuss that. But I think, when I mentioned earlier, every year about 2 million cattle are slaughtered. If you assume a very conservative value of those cattle, that it's 25,000 shillings, that's 50 billion shillings. If it's 35, it's 70 billion. If it's 45, it's 90 billion. Okay? Now that amount of money goes down the value chain. It goes from meat processors and meat outlets, retail outlets in cities and towns, to terminal markets, to tertiary markets, to secondary markets. Tertiary markets maybe like in Garissa, secondary markets maybe in Australia, and primary until the pastoralist. There's that turning of money from hands worth between 50 to 90 billion Kenya shillings. If there was data that showed, if that was digitized, if a lot of, so the unfortunate thing is that a lot of these transactions are happening in cash. The ecosystem is very cash-based. Imagine if that was on a digital platform or on some mobile money or something that is traceable. How much financing could be unlocked, even to the pastoralist who is a primary producer, based on the monthly sales that they have through an aggregator.
That's excellent. We'll come back to pieces of that, but to your production question, I wanted to inquire you to think about, you feel very strongly about budgetary allocations, and you want to talk a little bit about the involvement of policy and sort of public spending and tax collecting.
Thank you very much. I think with regards to policy, first we have to understand that in Africa and in Kenya particularly, the agriculture sector, including livestock, is governed by several policies, laws and regulations. And most of these things are so fragmented, some of them are so outdated, and some are conflicting. That's the reality. So there is need for harmonization. And harmonization in the sense that there needs to be policy review that is consistently done, let's say over every 5 years or so, and alignment such that current issues are addressed and outdated issues are removed. But how do we do that? It should be thoroughly consultative and also involving different stakeholders. We could have heard that livestock bills were thrown out in Kenya recently, and it's because of lack of participation by stakeholders. So it would have been very important if thorough stakeholder participation would have been done, and policies should also be informed by evidences. It should not just be policy. Most of the state development actors just propose to do certain policies, and this brings on a lot of competition and a lot of also lack of harmony. So to address that, there is need for evidence-based policy formulation, and to also assist in this at public level, there should be enough capacity building for all the service providers, particularly government service providers and social service providers. Yeah, thank you.
Not related to talk about budget allocations, particularly for matters. But to come back to you and particularly this, I know you have a lot of exciting new ones that you want to offer, particularly surprisingly that working capital might not be the biggest barrier, which I think for me was absolutely a shocker. So maybe you can say a little bit more about that, and then we'll come back to you to Christine to share a little bit about your sense of what investment might look like in areas of high employment.
Yeah, so thanks, Alex. I think I'll just follow up on what Peter said. So just going back and re-emphasizing and kind of emphasizing again. So opportunity, just the vastness of the Drylands itself just gives a lot of opportunities for people to work on. So just to say that, going back on the part of the working capital, money gets exchanged and they exchange hands all the time. And it happens in a very organized fashion. It's just that, it is not mainstreamed and what they define, and most of the time, informal is often associated with something that is extremely disorganized. People don't know what they're doing, and essentially everything is like a big chaos. It is actually not. People don't want to go to the formal, quote-unquote, systems because it's not really what they want. The formal systems actually try to make it like a one-size-fits-all. So they don't want to customize for the needs of their client. In this case, we are talking about clients such as the pastoral community. So over here, basically what we are talking about, and like in terms of how to unlock finance, number one, collaboration. Second of all is like let's be innovative. As in like we talk of innovations all the time. Why is it that we've not been innovative enough to actually give innovative, say, credit products, credit lines, or innovative savings lines? How can we do this? Like, we can work together, and of course, like being from a research institute, of course, we need to develop evidence around that works. So like, so we need to actually work together to suggest that some kind of like models do work. So it has to be like a very hands-on research implementation kind of approach, and not just what sits on the shelves. That is something I'm totally against. So given that like I've been doing research for development all my life, and I think the third important part is like also in terms of recognizing that yes, there are traders, but within the traders there are different segments of traders, and it has to be really targeted in terms of what kind of traders you're looking for. Who are these traders? There are women. Mind you, a lot of the exchange of hands are happening at the small business level. Nobody's really thinking of that. And that could actually be like a gold mine. And these small businesses are what are run by the women. They're run by the youth along the trading corridors. Let's focus on those ones. People often say like, that people have, and the brief kind of says that there is lack of areas of investment. It's actually not the lack. People are not looking in terms of, they're not looking cleanly. But at the same time, the brief also says that for every producer, there is an investor somewhere. Let's find the producer and let's get the investor to that person. That is what I would say. Thanks.
I don't know if this is going to answer the question you had, but one of the surprising things that we found in the Kenya study was how game the commercial banks are to do investing in this sector. If you can dig through the bureaucracy and find someone to talk to, you sort of get to the point of they are actively looking for new sectors to invest in. They have a huge amount of capital to deploy that they can't, they're struggling to deploy, frankly. The problem is they remain incredibly risk averse. So what happened with our, when we had our convening where we had the businesses pitch, and we had three from the Drylands there, the banks offered all the businesses there various loan products, but they were at 18% interest rate, so it just wasn't manageable for most of the businesses. We do have one of our businesses that is moving forward with asset finance with one of the banks and doing a product for their customer, doing a credit product for their customer. So, I mean, I think what we found with the commercial banks is given they're more willing in some ways to go into the pastoral areas, maybe even understand them a little bit more than some of the impact investors and DFIs that come in from outside. And they are starting to develop credit products that are specific for businesses in those areas, but there's still a long way to go. And I think Tito can probably tell us a little bit more because they did even a more intensive study on this. But just before I hand it over to Tito, maybe to talk a little bit about that. The other thing that at some point we should talk about is environment and investor perspectives on the rangelands and climate change and the environment and whether, and what that means in terms of, unlock investment. And what we found to be the case is the smaller the investor, not just the ticket size, but actually the smaller, like the operation that they have and the more nimble they are, the less concerned they are. Their number one priority is impact for smallholders and pastoralists. Secondary is environment and other social concerns. When you get to the DFIs and the larger ones that want to make a 10 million and up investment, they pretty much say they're not going to take a ruminant investment to their board at this point because of the negative environmental impact. I think there's an opportunity there for Lucia and the Masterclass Center and the ILRI group to help, to get better data and information about what is actually happening. Because right now it's just a blanket, no limited investments. Yeah. It's not actually looking at data about that. It's just saying, we're not going to do it. We're not going to take it to our board. It's a non-starter. But for now, it's really looking at the banks and then also those smaller investors that are more nimble and more able to do it. So I don't teach it.
Yes, just picking up from that. I And just to re-emphasize, banks are looking for good financing opportunities within the Drylands. At least a number of them that we really have some presence here. When we spoke to banks, for a number of them, there was a question of capacity to credit appraise the businesses or individuals coming to apply for loans of the financing from the banks. There was a question of building pipeline for their agri-financing businesses. For a number of them, also the question of what is actually the strategic importance of livestock. That also was a big question, and some areas of support that we were asked is if we could do maybe some market sizing that would actually tease out the huge revenue pool that lies in the livestock sector for farmers. So those are some of the issues that are maybe holding back banks from fully stepping into this space. I think the banks that have gotten into this space struggle between doing what I would call very small, almost foundation-based lending that is based on more like concessional funding and not yet getting where they could come in with proper commercial funding. And perhaps one of the issues is also the interest rate environment that we are in at the moment. And then maybe just also to touch on the issue of environment and climate change, we are working with a lead processor who are now piloting some greenhouse gas emission mitigation strategies with their beef suppliers. And they are doing this motivated or perhaps with some pressure from the investor. And so what we are doing is seeing, number one, again, just critical to formulate what are the big sources of emissions, what are the strategies to reduce those emissions, and what's the commercial viability, what is the cost benefit analysis of implementing these strategies. But if this is successful, it could be a very interesting event in the market, whereby an off-taker is kind of pressuring, well, not pressuring, but I would say supporting and perhaps partly pressuring suppliers to start implementing some of these greenhouse gas emission strategies.
Okay. Thanks. You actually just wanted to go to the question. I realized that when I was responding, I didn't actually respond to the question around bundling and sort of how it can unlock finance. In our opinion, when I say our, because I speak on the behalf of my team, which works on risk management solutions, I think that is potentially what we need to do right now. And even when we're talking about, for most people in the room sitting here, they would know that as much as index-based livestock insurance is something which has been hailed as the success, but a lot of us know that there are also significant flaws to the way it has been, and it is now not fit for purpose the way it is currently, right? The reason being is that the shocks are increasing, droughts are increasing, and there are several other complexities that are coming. Also, just going back to what Christine mentioned, is that entire herd sizes get wiped off, and then investors they don't have anything to really take to the market. So what if we actually work in a way through bundling of financial and non-financial products together, which sort of helps the producer to actually anticipate this shock and very consciously make up his or her mind in terms of how are they going to maintain their herd size. And this means not just the part of the size, but also in terms of the health of the herd size, what they are feeding, and that also then taps on the environment, because the less emissions that you actually emit from your animals, the better it is. It's actually more environmental friendly, and you might actually even get better price in the market. So basically, the work around feed, identifying new feed mechanisms, innovative feed mechanisms, They could be something like, they could be crop residues or even like pallets or whatever have you. So again, like working with institutions who are actually working in this to actually produce evidence. Well, a little example, one of the studies that we have been doing recently shows that if you actually give on offer, and mind you, pastoralists are more than happy to pay for services so long they see value in it. I think this is again another myth that pastoralists won't pay because they don't want to, or like if they don't have the capacity. None of it is true. If they see the value, and if you can convince them that this is valuable, they will pay. And they will actually work around their finances to make sure that they actually take out that chunk to actually pay for that service. So what we have seen is that if they understand the value of that service, they will pay for it. And now from a very small experiment that we have just finished, we have actually seen that just by offering animal health services and nutrition services with insurance, automatically the demand for insurance has actually gone up because they know that, okay, if they don't get the insurance policy, they won't get the services. So this is how you sort of crowd in also not just service providers, but also financial providers who want to actually want to give this. What does this essentially do is that basically by maintaining like a complete ecosystem, you're actually now doing like you're actually trying to maintain an entire ecosystem, which in turn then actually and produce evidence, and this in turn actually incentivizes people to actually then invest. So that is what I would say, like the bundling becomes like a way of to unlock finance and evidence protection.
I think we should actually address what I wanted to address. There is this notion about pastoralists not paying for services or for products and all this. And the whole thing goes around the family segment. When I told you about establishing franchise model in Northern Rangelands, the idea that was there, or the notion that was there at the time, was that pastoralists will not buy products and that they will just pay for free products for government, for interventions that were largely emergency-based. But that's not the reality. Today, after knowing many of those products, they are buying actually, and they are drivers for most of those products, particularly livestock feeds, minerals, all this, more than they are consuming other parts of this country. So the understanding should be around. First, I don't know if the banks are represented here in this gathering, but the issue is, do the service providers understand their customers? Okay? That's the question that needs to be addressed. Because not many people understand pastoralists. They are always treated with attitude, and the rates that they are given is vilifying and actually criminal. Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Can I just make a really, really quick comment to follow up on Rusha? If there was an area that I could claim to be hot as an investment area within livestock, it's alternative animal feed. So the idea of alternative animal feeds, because it's expensive, because grains are, there are many, many reasons. One of them can also be that with different feeding regimes, you can reduce emissions. So that's the hot ticket. So if you're looking to go into business, I recommend it.
Thank you. I want to present an example. I just want to bring out a few fundamental issues that we have.
Just want to put your mic.
Few fundamental issues that we have experienced trying to craft and actually to participate in the livestock value chain. About 5 years ago, we took accountability assessment with the livestock sector, involving the entire sector and national service providers. That report brought out some very, very fundamental issues. The first one is that which we already knew anyway, for those of us who are in that space, was the fact that Northern Kenya is only 1% agricultured. And therefore, you find that only maybe the CBD of Wajir, Garissa, Isiolo, Mayani, and other places have a title deed. And therefore, for you to get any commercial debt transaction within the customs, and the first thing you're going to have is what collateral you're going to provide. And if only 1% of the area is collateralized, it means that the 9% is automatically skewed. So that's the first part of the point. The second point to reinforce on this is the fact that banks have what I can call a vast list of assets. The risk of the assets is just too high in the banks. Even the analogue risk, I think I've done banking for 20 years. We've only been able to move the cash lending from 3% to 5% after 20 years of it. Asset risk is currently still untouchable. That's the reality. The third issue is really the stability of the financial products that are provided. So the product development division sits in Nairobi and then develops a product for Northern Kenya. How does that condition take place? How does that condition take place? Even in the investment space, where the thing is coming from, I have one of the exports, and we're talking about 90 billion. I think he talks about the livestock market. The 2 million livestock. We lost 2.5 million livestock in the last round. That was 100 billion. What investments? Despite that, so you actually those two figures match. Even the private sector, whether it is venture capital or whatever, I have one export company whose proposals and pitches have been sitting with a lot of businesses. They have done more than 6 months rounds with no takers. Again, just taken the way we used to handle bank. So at the time, tourism was high risk. So after tourism was high risk. So no finance was high tourism. Construction was high risk. So the same way, she mentioned prominent financing is high risk. These are really the issues that we are tackling, and the cost of which can we so that here, what are the potential solutions? So far, I'm not hearing.
Okay, let's get to some.
So just to find the program, we're willing to collaborate, and we, based on that report, we actually embarked on a product development process. We were able to validate that product 70%. There was a 30% challenge with that product. But can I assure you the 30% did not come from the pastures. The 30% came from the terminal market. In that way, at that time, the terminal markets were not really corporately reliable. So you find that the pastoralists will be able to give their products in the terminal market, and the guys disappears in Dubai. However, the meat gets into Dubai, and then the meat is condemned. Therefore, once the meat is condemned in Dubai by the Dubai brokers, when you come and tell the guys who gave you the meat in Kenya. So what happens is that the guy takes the next flight, maybe to Australia. That's it. So, but that has now improved. I believe now the terminal markets has matured. We now have quite a number of healthy competition. So I believe the 30% that was a challenge 5 years ago has been resolved. So if we are willing to sit down and fold our sleeves and work on the outstanding 30%.
Thank you. Can we take some? Are you ready to take up the challenge?
Yeah. Krishna.
Thanks a lot. I really like those reflections, partly what I was just thinking about. So my name is Geoffrey, SPARC Africa. Also been working for a couple of years, and I perfectly relate with the concerns raised by my colleague right here. And maybe the last bit that I'd like to bring is the aspect of insurance. When it comes to financing, particularly in asset areas, so if the animals are on free range, then most insurance companies, are afraid of taking insurance because of the risk that is inherent there. Because those animals are susceptible to contracting diseases as they move looking for grazing and all that. I really like the suggestion, around animal feeds consideration, because that would really go a long way in ensuring that they will be restricted in a particular place in such a way that it mitigates the risk of them contracting diseases as they move along. Yeah, but I think with the incentives that are coming into place, we have actually seen, and for a sale, for example, this is part of the conversation around mitigating that risk and also giving comfort to the commercial banks that we're currently working with to increase their lending, particularly actually the focus this quarter and as we get into 2025 for sailing is to support ASAL areas, those particular geographical locations, in such a way that yes, commercial banks will be incentivized to increase their lending without stringent requirements in terms of collateral and all that. And that would really go a long way in increasing that particular type of things.
Who's thinking Gatsby or Northern Rangelands Trust would have some good solutions for us?
So we were recently in Surrey County and we visited one of our partners in Kenya, a trader, commercial pastoralist who is also a trader aggregator. And he buys cattle from the pastoralist households around and then sells into Meru, into Karatina, and at times into Nairobi. He was saying that there are times that these households will be in a cash flow distress, and they will come to him and ask for financing. And he will give them the financing based on how many cattle they currently have, because that then gives him comfort that they'll be able to give him, to sell cattle a bit later on to him, and to offset that debt. And that's the way that financing is happening. So number one is that financing is happening, just not by our kind of white-collar friends who sit up around the street over here. But there is an ecosystem. I think Trey want to say it's not that it's chaotic. There is actually an ecosystem that is structured that allows this financing. I think the question for banks and for other financiers is how do we, rather than try them, rather than make them investor ready in the beginning, how do we make ourselves ready for them, essentially? Yeah? How do we embed ourselves better into the culture and the norms there, such that then we can actually do the financing? Because as I said earlier, the opportunity is huge. It's huge, not just for financing, but even if you were to digitize those payments, the non-interest income that a financial institution will get is humongous. It's huge. So the opportunity is really huge, and I think banks don't fully appreciate what that opportunity looks like. And if they give, then yeah. But another issue I think also is still getting into that cultural fit is a question of also Islamic financial solutions, which also need to be created and fitted better for many of the consumers of these financial products and services. I have one more thing that I wanted to say right now.
It'll come back to you. Do you want to go first? Just go ahead, yeah, given that you're such
I wish I had specific financial institutions, specific financial products, solutions, but we're not there yet. I think that's the bottom line. I think there's a lot of work to be done on one of the things that Nate had raised earlier, which is this data, demystifying, helping, there's multiple levels of that. But one is, investors and banks basically just saying, we still don't understand the market opportunity. Everyone sitting in this room is like, still don't understand the market opportunity. But there's there's still something that has to be done with that, and then there's something to be done with the businesses themselves. And, we're not necessarily talking about like huge export companies and product. We're talking about some of the smaller companies that can absorb $300,000, maybe $3 million, and working with them, the processors, some of these smaller businesses that are doing local trading and input supply and feed for the producers and whatnot, and supporting them to get their financials in order, to figure out how to communicate their case, especially from an impact standpoint. Because the other thing about the banks, so for the smaller impact investors, I think we can easily see, if we worked on it, a few good investments by impact investors into the drylands in the next few years. But there's work to be done to do that. Commercial banks are also starting to sort of act a little bit more like impact investors. We're looking for that impact story to tell as well. So it's helping the businesses. How can they tell that story from the drylands as well about what their impact is, including on the climate and the environment side? They need to take control of that narrative. The businesses themselves do. Otherwise, it's just going to continue to run rampant out of control. So how can they be supported to take control of that narrative and tell that story?
I'll take the question.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, good afternoon. Yes, and thanks for all the insightful information that we found today. My name is Paul Asura, and from Trinidad, Africa. And from what's been mentioned, yes, there seems to be financing sitting somewhere with the banks, according to what's been said, and it needs to be unlocked. But we've done a lot of work has been done by people in this field for decades. So after all this time, I'm wondering, is there a list or an index of all the risks by area, so that actually some effort can be put towards addressing these risks, including using technology, which has become very powerful of late? And the second question is, are these risks evolving? Is it that I work on risks today and then tomorrow I find new ones? Because what I've seen, like in the other crops, sometimes it's just farming, sometimes it's weather, okay, sometimes it's bad banditry. But I'm just thinking of simplifying it. For example, you invest, there's a primary producer, he says, I want to produce 1,000 goats. And I want an off-taker, an liable off-taker, but not like what was mentioned, that something happens and the meat plant is closed. So what happens? How are those things addressed? So do we have a list of all those things? Because we actually have answer questions when we are facing the smallholder farmers with all kinds of situations. Thanks.
Okay, I will go first. So in terms of risk profiling, I would say that there is not an inventory really, but one of our sister CGIR centers, the Alliance of Biodiversity and CFA, at some point, like a few years ago, they had actually done a climate risk profiling for most of the ASLs.
We're rebuilding some of them right
Awesome.
now.
Yeah, I was actually just going to say that. Like, I think this kind of risk profiling is not static, and it actually needs to be revisited from time to time, because you're right. Like, in one word, the answer is yes. It's just not that the risks are not evolving and they are not becoming. There are not new ones coming, but even the landscape by itself is evolving. So it's just not the challenges, but even the opportunities are evolving, and we need to actually see whether we are addressing and actually keeping our ear to those challenges and actually opportunities. So I would actually say that. So it's like a evolving and a constant thing. And another thing is, but having said that, investors will not invest in like doing a risk profiling, which actually they should, to be honest. If they want to actually really think of where to invest, they should know where the risks are. And if you don't want to invest in this, then what else do you want to invest in, really? So
UNDP's African Borderland Center just did the first one. They invested in a risk profile.
Excellent. There. At least, so maybe those are some of the trailblazers, like, and more investment needs to actually come into these kind of areas. Going back to the gentleman from Nakafuru Sako, I would actually say that, yeah, if you are looking for like a very concrete solution which is going to change things like this, it's not happening. The ASALs are an area which will take a transformative change and will take time. And this is what I keep telling people, give it time. Like, you're not going to get something and things are not going to be hunky-dory like tomorrow or like, 2 years from now. It's not going to happen. We are in for the long haul. It's going to be at least 10 years. At least. The assets have been around for 50 years. Aid has been going in there for 100 years. If things were to happen so quickly, everybody would be very rich by now, and we would be out of jobs, to be honest. So the point is that it's just not about thinking about like those kind of quick changes. It's about incremental changes, and also about the narrative. The Assads have constantly had that narrative, oh, they're marginalized, nothing works over there. So the point is, how many of us, like when the first thing they think about Assad is that, oh, land of opportunities, they'll think, oh crap, land of conflict. That is what, that's the difference. So look out for young researchers such as Tahira Mohammed, please raise your hand. They're actually working on things like prosperity for pastoralism, changing the narrative. That is what we need to actually support people. That's what's going to actually attract investments. Very quickly, I'm going to touch a little bit on the fragile context, again, related to your question. What I would say is that it is also important that, like, investments happen, and I think Christine mentioned it a little bit, but investments are also given in areas such as rangeland governance, land use planning. You're not going to get title deeds in the rangelands. It's never going to happen. But the point is that how can you sort of get recognition that there is actually land use planning that happens, and how can that be mainstream, basically? Because rangeland governance, working together with communities, is one of the tools that we think is going to get peace in those areas. It's going to reduce conflicts and make people work together. As a result of which, people are then going to be more willing to sort of invest and unlock the finance. What you are talking about, and people from Nairobi are then going to actually come to the Assads and say, this is where I want to invest in. Yeah. Thank you.
There's a question here, a burning question here, so I'll return back and just quickly ask.
Thank you. Michael Baka from Zambia. We making an insurance program in the government, and with the financial sector players, that yes, that's the banks and the insurance companies. So an observation and then a question. A quick observation is, I don't know what we found as the role of the risk. The risk has been measured, so we think like the public sector, like subsidy, assembly is here, both public and private. Do they exist in this area? Yeah, and what models can we grow on this? Then the other area is part of the listing, I think, is also how people are organized. Like we find Ethiopia as we are delivering insurance to 118 cooperatives. In Kenya, to deliver to like 200,000 customers, we are going to almost 14,000. It's very expensive, it's not sustainable. So, what did you find about how the communities or how the people are organized in a way that financing? Because I think without organization, even though you say digital, I think because even market access needs organization. So, I was trying to scan through the report. Maybe you could quickly mention in Somali, Kenya, especially where I'm present, or where we are, is there an organized infrastructure that people can have?
I'm not going to directly answer that. I actually want to go. I think I would like to Tanzania. Both Gatsby and our team have interesting models for organizing diversity. Over to you. Thank you.
So, first I wanted to encourage the gentleman from Carrefour, maybe the alternative for all the challenges that you have raised about, and you have said you're working with SARC. I think SARC is a solution for that landscape because of the experience we have. At Northern Rangelands Trust at Missionary Works, we have Northern Rangelands Circle, and over 8 years, I really totally agree with Usha here that it takes time for these people to really buy into these changes and accept and get. Over those 8 years, we grew the membership of the Missionary Circle from 215 to 6,300 in 8 years. And the number is growing and the demand is rising. That indicates to the trust, and the kind of services that people really identify with. And I think with banks, the rates that they provide, all the bureaucracies of filling forms and all of this and monitoring people are the deterrents to people consuming those services. SACCO is the best alternative. That's what I wanted to say, and we are talking from experience. With regards to the risking, yes, I actually understand Drive project. I think Zebri is one of the service providers for Drive project. The issue is still we see a lot of bureaucracy. I'm speaking from a consumer point of view, not from NFP, because I'm actually one of the beneficiaries of Drive insurance for my livestock. So the biggest issue with this is bureaucracy that is involved. We understand this is being run through ministries and the government of Kenya. You understand the bureaucracies, and most of the times people are not available to even access the information as required. But the good thing that you guys have done and that we have seen is really working, and it's contributing to acceptability and taking on ownership of this service is the community agents that you guys have developed. We understand they are community agents. And those are people who can really, they are doing good job, we see, but we see that again, people work with expectation. The issue of premium, and then what's it called, payouts. We call payouts. So the payouts is not expected, particularly when there is rain. People feel that they would rather invest their money elsewhere than to put it in that and to be held. That's a risk with customers. But even still, how about, let's say, sensitizing the part of the community that really understands this? There are a lot of professionals who own livestock in this country, and they need to be involved, and we feel that we are not part of it. Thank you.
We have anything to add until we're about to take I think we might have one more question. If not, excellent. We'll take some final comments from Peter from everyone else. I'll share the names so you can find them once more.
I also wanted to emphasize, reiterate what Dr. said about taking time. Just from maybe what we can relate to, 25 years ago, it was perhaps unthinkable that non-salaried people could get financing from it's not the case today. Today, even the term investor really could, would have different meanings depending on who the investor is. Because for a investor who is many of us are investor maybe. So it's changing, and it's been changing. And I firmly believe that in the next 10 to 20 years, again, the landscape will be so different. On the risking, I think it's certainly something that could catalyze the investments into Drylands. From our study with banks, quite a number of them, asked in the interim before their credit departments are okay to provide some unsecured financing. Could there be that kind of collateral, risk sharing or risk mechanism that takes away that risk from the banks? So I think it might be necessary, and probably development entities, DFIs, could play a big role in providing some of that de-risking mechanism.
So thank you very much. I think we cannot overemphasize the centrality and the importance of livestock as being value for rural setups of these countries, and generally in Africa, for the positions of food security and nutritional value the livestock has. And we understand there was a Maputo declaration that was really very significant declaration that should have really driven a lot of change in Africa in terms of resourcing livestock But for one or two reasons, some countries could have implemented it and it could be working for them. But for us, maybe having had evolution 10 years after that declaration, and having now government on the ground, in terms of counties and all this, and from the point of my own experience of working in the counties, the resources that should have really been helpful in creating jobs, in promoting trades, in enhancing and strengthening this livelihood is not really coming through. And it's a big challenge to the leadership of these countries and generally in Africa. And the hope came through during the recent summit, of governance. And we thought something would change. In Marsabit County, when I was chief officer, we actually lobbied for those resources to be allocated to the sector, particularly to livestock. And the misnomer is, most of the times, even at national ministry level, there is this issue of when you mention agriculture, a lot of resources go to crops than to going to the livestock proper. And that's a big challenge because bulk of the agriculture in the asal areas, in the dryland areas, is livestock, and it really needs to be addressed. And I think development sectors really need to challenge that. We cannot be having programs that are financed by bilateral organizations, or rather, let's say, UN bodies, World Bank, all this, and they all go into trying putting money into crops, and it doesn't really work for the communities. So it's a big challenge, and the other issue that is really very important is the participation of the community pillars, particularly youths and women in the livestock sector, and they are really very important. And why do I feel that? Because at Machinery Works we do community trainings, and even from our own observation, from the experience we have in these tribal areas, women and youth are great. They are very responsive, first of the team. They are very responsive to changes, and we feel if we really try to promote technologies, innovations, all these through youth and women focus, it will really change a lot. And that can be anchored properly well in policies, and the hope is in the policies that are being proposed, and some of them have already been done in gender inclusion in agriculture, in youth, in agribusiness. All these strategies will really work for us, and that should be our focus. Thank you.
So I think I'll touch a little bit on the subsidy issue raised by Michael. I think subsidies is actually very important. There is no doubt about that. But the issue really is that it should not be blanket subsidies to everyone. It should really be targeted, and which means that we need to really understand who needs what is the status of people, and how does it actually help them. And I come from a country like India where actually subsidies have actually transformed the agriculture sector to quite a large extent, because over time people have really understood that it's just not about giving a blanket 50% or 60% subsidy to everyone, but really in terms of what do you really need that subsidy for. So I think that similarly applies even especially for the drylands, because there is again, there are different categories and different wealth and different herd size holders and things like that. Women are also a part of it. So basically, if you just blanketly give a random subsidy, say for, cattle, women actually get left out. Because the thing is that as much norms are changing, but the reality still is that the large size livestock holding still remains with the men. And the small ruminants are something that women actually can cash on. And poultry, of course. Poultry is livestock, just for FYI information. But it is considered as part of livestock. What I would actually end by saying is, again, let's just work together. We need to generate evidence, enough evidence to actually convince the investors and even the governments. Actually, it's just not the investors. I think we sometimes tend to be a bit lopsided that private sector needs to do everything or investors need to do everything. It is actually not that. Governments also play a very critical role in sort of attracting these investors into these areas, because they need that kind of backing. They need to feel comfortable that, okay, if we are ready to take a risk, the government is actually going to back up. And governments will only back you if they actually have the evidence to see that it actually works. So let's work towards evidence, let's work towards data generation, let's work towards innovative ways of data generation and also innovative ways of actually collaterals and like innovations around financing provisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Two things before we close. As Risha mentioned, Kevin and a few others from our team on the table in the marketplace, as you never couldn't be drop by and see a big trouble. Why not? But that says SPARC, ask more questions about certainly evidence, but one more like let's dig into the needs that someone may us to do. Tomorrow we'll also have a session, Taylor is here, so the facilitator also by SPARC on climate information services in the Drylands working directly attached to this. So that's another one that we'll have to see at. And I want to say thank you so much for the gift of your attention. Thank you so much for your expertise. Let's go to tea.